So this is the Best Foot Forward podcast. Welcome. Is it too long?
It's too redundant.
Okay,
because
let's
I
do that
already said
again.
it. We don't need to say it again.
Right, let's do it again. All right, welcome to the Best Foot Forward podcast. My name is Vic from Cestlavic, and I am a sneaker artist in San Francisco.
And I'm Ann Duskus of Studio Duskus, and I am a footwear designer and a design consultant in San Francisco as well.
Yes. So, Ann, what do we want to talk about today?
I would love to talk about how we started versus how it's going.
Okay.
So let's do that.
Yeah, let's do it. So why don't you start? Why don't you tell me a little bit about how it started, what it was like before, and then how it's going.
Yeah, so I started my career as a fashion designer. I study fashion design in college. That's what I have a degree in. And so I spent pretty much like the first half of my career designing apparel, specifically bottoms for youth, for women, for men. And it was interesting because it was something that I discovered that I could be good at. And it wasn't something that I think I would be good at. I sort of just discovered it sort of later in my teens and my early 20s.
Yeah. Fashion design or
I think it's just more I don't even think it's fashion design. I think it's just the technical work that comes with doing fashion design. And fashion design happens to be the narrative, I guess.
Yeah.
And then so it's interesting because through that, just going through fashion school and studying, like learning all the technical skills that's involved in building a garment, I discovered that it really fits my personality really well, in the sense that I'm very meticulous.
Yeah.
And I hate to... The other day, somebody commented, Ann, like, you're a perfectionist. And I think I was telling you about this, and I was like, and this person said it to me as a compliment. Like, it definitely was intended as a compliment, but then in a weird way, I didn't really like
You're
that.
like, I don't like it. Yeah.
And I think it's weird because I think if 10 years ago or like 15 years ago, you were to call me that, I'm like, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Because I think, when you're a perfectionist, I think, you're sort of being held as like somebody with high standards. That's what I think, right? And so, but then as I'm growing and maturing in my career and developing as a person, I'm finding that being a perfectionist isn't necessarily a good thing. And so I sort of was like, I don't like that.
Yeah. It's because you have different interpretations, right? From the person who gave you that as a compliment versus how you interpret it as yourself. You're like, well, I don't necessarily like that part of me that needs everything to be exact because I don't need that, right?
Right. Well, I thought I did, right? But anyways, I go off on tangents. But anyways, and so I think, through just studying fashion design, I realized it's something I could be good at because it really fits my personality type. This like OCDness, this, like desire for, everything lining up and, how there's like a process to all the things.
Yeah.
And so I really enjoy that. And then it was sort of, through doing fashion design where I discovered footwear design, sort of, again, by accident, because I never thought my skill set can translate into footwear design.
Right.
But if you think about it, the foundation of design is the same. You think about like composition, you think about color theory, you think about all of these things that you will learn in design that can be translated to something else, designing another product. And as with all things, you just have to learn what that body of product is and how you can apply your skill set to that. And so I, halfway through my design career, I had the opportunity to switch from designing apparel to designing footwear. And I pretty much, dive like deep into it and sort of, I think I've told you this in the past, that was sort of the first time where I discovered I finally felt like I found a place for myself in design.
Yeah.
And so that was sort of like how it started. But before I get into like how it's going, I want to hear how you started and what were you doing before? Because
so let me just say, when listening to you talk about how you started, it reminded me of something that my professor said. So I was doing my master's at the time, and I'll get into that a little bit more. But my professor told me, you're here to learn how to learn. Right? So when you're doing your undergrad, maybe at the beginning of your education, a lot of times you need to learn the foundations of how to do something, which I think is like art school for you. You have to learn color theory, you have to learn composition, you have to learn all these things. And then later on, as you get more mature in your craft, you realize that you now have the skills to learn to do any new technique that you want. And I feel like, in the future, we'll touch on that on like projects that we're working on. But it's really important to know that you get to a certain point in your learning where you now have the ability to learn anything. You are capable of studying and researching and figuring out how things work. You don't have to be taught how to do something specifically, and then that's all you can do, right?
Wait, okay. What your professor said is golden. Can you say that one more time?
You're here to learn how to learn.
I love that so much.
Yeah. So, and that's what really, I think, opened up my eyes to being able to do something completely different and not feel like you're outside your comfort zone all the time. You don't belong, right? I think that's something that is a feeling that haunts us all the time. So backtracking a little bit, in the past, I was a researcher. So I did a lot of studying in science, and then I also did my master's, and I did a lot of research too. So my field was in, first off, molecular biology, and then I went into electron microscopy, and it's just going to be a whole bunch of words, but materials engineering. I was working on studying the surfaces of hip implants that had failed and were retrieved from patients who had to get them removed. And so it just kind of got smaller and smaller and smaller. When I started my undergrad, I was doing molecular biology. Was looking at things in the cell, the human body and mechanisms of how things works, virology, all of that stuff. And then I started doing some projects using a microscope. And then that led me to doing my master's because it was in a related field in microscopes too. And then just like I got tunnel vision and everything just got smaller and smaller and smaller to the point where I lost track of the big picture. And I was like, what do I actually want to do in life? And I was
like, what am I actually looking at?
What am I actually looking at? Do I want to do this for the rest of my life? And although I love that technical part of me, and I love feeling like I'm learning, I love being educated, there was also this creative side that was always kind of repressed, for lack of better words. And it was not something that was celebrated in what I was doing. And I was always more proud of how creative I could be. Let's say I was doing a presentation and I was showing what I had done all year long in research, but I created this presentation that was really creative, or a really like unique way of kind of giving people that information. That wasn't the part that was celebrated. It was everything else. And I didn't like that feeling. So I couldn't see myself doing a career in just science where everything was limited. And then when I moved to San Francisco, I spent a lot of time interviewing with biomed companies. And every single job I would throw in this question, which was like, I'm a very creative person. Do you think that within this role, there is capacity for me to use my creativity to my advantage, where I could help the company out, where I could make a difference? And a lot of times the answer wasn't what I was looking for. It wasn't like, oh, you're so creative, like, welcome to our team. We want you to be innovative. We want you to be that. Nobody really said that to me, surprisingly. And so I was like, oh, I can't see myself working in biomed for the next 5 or 10 years. Yeah. And that's what brought me to what we're doing today.
Because it sounds like what you did before. It's like you were trying to maybe not influence, but maybe open people up in this more, traditional field to a new ways of working.
Yes.
But because of the position that you were in, you didn't really have a voice that somebody would want to listen to,
Yeah.
as far as changing the process or just jazzing things up.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
and I can see that too. I think like especially in the medical field, in
Mm-hmm.
the biology field, like everything is like very analytical, everything is very methodical.
Yep.
And like they don't want like they're almost, it feels like there isn't as much room to play creatively, because that's just not the place for it, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even between fields. So I came from a bio background, but then I was working with materials, and the two almost had no crosstalk. It was like if you looked at materials, you solely looked at the metals, the plastics, and all of that stuff. And I was like, well, but this thing has been in the human body. What about what has happened in the human body? And it was just like a shrug. Everybody's just like, like that's not what we care about here. But I'm like, but that is so important. The whole system is so important. And so I just felt like that wasn't the right space for me to move on, because I had this like sense of creativity and innovation and wanting to try new things that they weren't able to satisfy.
Okay, let me ask you this. And I think this is a very important question to me personally, because again, if you're just listening to our audio, we also have video content of this podcast on YouTube. But if you're just listening to us, Vicky and I were women of Asian descent.
Yes.
And so we both grew up in a Chinese, I guess, background environment.
Yeah.
That's a little bit somewhat with some tradition and culture that really influenced us growing up.
Yeah.
And so let me ask you this. And so, because I think this is something maybe some of our readers can relate to, or some of our listeners can relate to. When you were doing what you're doing before, what you just described, your study in science and your work in science, regardless of how, your colleague or the people in your workplace saw you, like how did your family and your parents felt about the work that you were doing in science?
I feel like they were comforted by the fact that I was going down a path that had a guaranteed like end point.
Potentially.
Yeah. Right? To them it's like, oh, she's in school. I don't have to worry about her. Like, and I've always been a good scholar, so I've never on that front ever had to like have my parents worry about me or remind me to do my homework or anything like that. I was always a really good student. And so that almost gave them the comfort. They didn't have to be helicopter parents and like push me to go to do like Kumon or anything like that. I wasn't that kind of a student. I was very self-sufficient in that case. And I think it's very different now, or when I'm going into art, where they're like, oh, are you sure you want to do this? There's that resistance that comes back in the form, not of like directly, hey, don't do this, but very subtle comments that come in.
Like a little passive aggressive.
A little passive aggressive, a little bit like, are you sure? Like, why don't you just, the thing that bothers me the most is you are so educated. Why are you going to paint shoes for people? And it's like an innocent thing. Their intention is not to make me feel bad. It's literally just how they feel.
Yeah.
Right. Their reflection on like, oh, my daughter she's so educated. She's done so many things. She is a smart person. But why is she doing something that doesn't necessarily make her more money or isn't their definition of success?
Yeah. And I'm surprised they're not more hard on you. And they're like kind of just like trusting you, because maybe they know you're that personality where like the more you tell me to do something, the more I'm not going to do it, and I think I'm just surprised that they're not more like hard on you, because again, like we're immigrants, and so like for our parents to like I can sort of like imagine how they would feel like, because it's like,
but also
I didn't immigrate.
But also I left the country before I made this decision. Right Right when I arrived, I was still looking for a job here in the same field that I had graduated from. It wasn't until a year later that I was like, you know what? Screw this. I'm going to do what I want to, because I was really unhappy looking for jobs that I didn't want to do. So when I made this decision, I was like, this is for me. Everybody, like my family, all these pressures, all these societal pressures that come from expectations of what you're supposed to be were so far away. They're back in Canada.
Yeah.
Now
So
I'm in
would
the
you say
States.
this is more of a cultural pressure? Like not even a society
Right. It is
pressure,
a cultural,
right?
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, I've always been, I live with my grandparents. So the entire family would come to visit my house, you know, on weekends and things like that. So I was always this kind of golden child. I did everything right. I got straight A's, you know. It felt like all eyes were on me, even though I'm sure nobody really cared. So it was this pressure that I built up for myself, and I couldn't really express it all until I was far away and I removed myself from that situation. So it's not necessarily like I was so brave to just be like, you know what, forget all of you, forget what you're saying. I'm going to do my own thing. It was like, let me remove myself from the toxic situation that was happening, not because the people were toxic, but it just ended up being that way.
Yeah.
And then I started my own life doing what I'm doing now.
So would you say, like, is it safe to say then if you didn't move away from your family,
Good question.
how likely would you still be doing your work in science right now?
I think the pressures would be a lot greater.
Yeah.
Because eventually it'd be like, okay, because starting out, you don't make a lot of money as an artist. And it would get to the point where it's like, I have to pay rent. I have all these expenses. I have all these costs that I need to worry about. And I think that would really take a toll on me a lot more, not being so far away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so interesting to me because I think there's a lot of parallels in sort of, you know, our background, you know, even though like, you know, in our side conversations, we always talk about how, yes, like we're both Asian minority women who are immigrants, but, you know, like I always talk about like, I grew up like really privileged, you know, but we can get we can get into that in another episode. But I do want to like talk about like, okay, like that was how we started.
Yeah.
Right. And let's talk about like how it's going.
Yeah.
So for me, so I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and I think sometimes like, you know, you're so, you know, involved and you're so invested and you're so just kind of like in the zone of what you're doing that you forget how much time has elapsed.
Yes.
Until somebody checks in on you and you're like, oh crap. And you do a little self-reflection.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh wow, like I've actually been doing this longer than I thought I have. And so earlier I was talking about how I started my career in fashion design. And then so that was like the first 6 years of my like design career. And I've now been doing like footwear design for 6 years.
Yeah.
And so, which is cool because now like I'm like it's split down the middle. You know, I spend like time doing apparel, I've spent time doing footwear, and I did a little bit of both. And so from apparel design and I transitioned into footwear design. I did like cowboy boots for a number of years.
What was that switch? Was it a job opportunity from apparel to footwear?
Yeah, so a little bit of both. And so never had I imagined I would even begin like designing footwear. And it was just one of those things where, you know, within the company that I was designing apparel for, I call it like, I don't know, the universe has his like plans for you or something, right? So every day, in order for me to get to my desk from the front door of the building of my office to my desk in the apparel design department, I have to walk through the footwear design department. And I have to walk past this big, like full on like wall display of like shoes, right? That the entire company, like the company has designed or released for the season. And I mean, just like hundreds of shoes on the wall.
That's amazing.
And you know, so those of us who don't work in footwear department always just stop by and admire all the beautiful products on the shelf.
Yeah.
And so like every day I would walk by that. And then of course, you know, I was at that company long enough to where I started, you know, making a lot of friends and building rapport with, you know, other people in the department.
Yeah.
And then at some point, there was a job opportunity that popped up in the footwear design department. And it's strange because it's not something I probably would have considered, but I was also, I happened to be in a place where I was feeling a little bit stagnant, in terms of like what I was doing. Not that the work itself wasn't challenging, because again, like, to reinvent the wheel every season is a challenge in itself. And that's with every product, like every company that you will work for. But I was just like, I knew how to do my job, and I knew how to do it well already. And so in a weird way, it was just kind of like repetition, season over season.
And over again.
And so I was honestly just getting a little bored. Nothing was wrong with it. I was just like getting a little bored with the job. And so an opportunity came up in the footwear department, and the hiring manager happened to be my friend. And, again, like, he was super supportive. He ended up being my mentor, at the start of my footwear career. And he supported me in my sort of desire to want to learn a new skill set, because, footwear design, again, design itself is foundational. But switching from designing apparel to footwear is so different, because all the components, all the raw materials, everything is so different. And so like, all of a sudden, like, design seems interesting again, because now I'm designing a totally different product category, even though it's still designing for the same product, consumer, but it's just like a totally different category. And so I was just like really excited to have the opportunity. And I always say this to, young designers who are interested in pursuing footwear, to sort of like take a risk, obviously, like, be calculated and be cautious. But it was hard for me, because I think, I was on a great path if I had stuck to like apparel design. But I think I was really thinking like long term, what would be more satisfying for me as a person, with a new challenge. And so, so that's when I decided to take footwear design on.
And I think people think when you change careers or you pivot the direction that you're going, you can never go back. Do you get this feeling? Where it's like, oh, I'm so far down this other road that I could never go back. And I always feel like if you have that skill and you've had that experience, that stays with you. You can go back. You'll maybe later in your career, you're going to find this crossover between apparel and footwear again.
Oh my gosh,
or,
totally.
You're going to find this newfound excitement for apparel, and you're going to want to go back. And that's always an option. It's not always just like so single-mindedly, you can only go in this direction. You can only do this once you've made this decision.
And that's one of the advice that a few people gave me when I was really struggling with whether or not I pursue footwear design or just stay in apparel design. And then, I think a couple people said the same thing to me. It's like, well, you can always go back to apparel design. Just give it a try. Right. And I was like, oh yeah, like, thank you for saying that.
It lowers the fear of taking that jump. Yeah. So, but okay, tell me more about how it's going now.
So literally went from like designing cowboy boots to getting into shoemaking myself. Because again, like, you hear me say this all the time, you're knowing how to do the physical work for the product you're designing for makes you a better designer.
Absolutely.
Like 100%. And so and again, like, this is just me, like, always having this like itch to like wanting to know how things are made, wanting to know how things are built. And again, like, I'm a very hands-on person. And so like, for me, it wasn't like a stretch to like, okay, let me learn how to make shoes. And so I literally got into shoemaking and like fell in love with it, it was in a weird way. I don't think I've ever said this out loud, but in a weird way, I almost like enjoy the physical aspect of shoemaking more than the design itself. And that's why like people are always like, oh, Ann, let me see your designs. Like, no, the designs are in my head. Like I go straight to prototyping because I'd rather be making something
which
and
is
experimenting.
so crazy. Yeah.
And so, which is like good and bad because it's like, it would be nice to be able to show people, but you know, hopefully in the future when AI takes over, like I can just like project my brain onto the wall and people can see what's in my brain.
Yeah, exactly.
But,
you save all that step of like creating mock-ups and all of that.
Yeah. So, I mean, to now like having our own studio, you know, where I get to work directly with clients. And, you know, looking back, it's like, sometimes it feels really surreal. Yeah. And I was like, how did I get here? But it's like one thing leads to another. And sometimes, you know, you like, again, this going back to what we were saying earlier, sometimes you're so in the zone, you're so involved, like you don't take a moment to look up and like see what's really happening.
Totally. Yeah.
And I think that sort of just sums up like how I ended up here today, you know, how it's going, because it's like, okay, I'm just going to keep my head down. I'm going to keep working hard and I'm going to keep pursuing what satisfy me as a design professional. And the rest is like, it's out of my control and see what happens. Yeah. And honestly, like the other day somebody asked me too, it's like, are you happy? And I'm like, honestly, I am really happy. Yeah. You know, yes, like I was telling my dad last night, my dad's like, did you go to work today? I'm like, yeah. He's like, it's Saturday. I'm like, yeah, because I have so much work to do. And he's like, well, you need to make sure you rest. I'm like, I'll rest when the work is done, you know? But he's like, but I was like, Dad, like, you know, if you think about it, like when you're my age, like how hard were you working? So in comparison to how hard I'm working right now, like you put me to shame. So
I was going to say, it's such like an Asian thing for us to be like, let's put our heads down and work. And we're just going to work and work and work and work, do what we love. And then hope we succeed, hope we end up somewhere that we want to be, you know?
Yeah. So I'm just like, okay, like the universe will take care of it, but you have to keep pushing. And like, this is where I am right now. And I'm very grateful for it.
I love that.
Yeah. What about you? Like, tell me how things are going. Like,
it's the same thing. Honestly, now being a sneaker artist full-time, doing this all on my own, I feel like every week, every day almost, I have a new thing that I'm learning because I'm still trying to navigate this new space that I'm in and figure out where I belong, how I want to establish my business, how I want to continue going. And I think something I learned from you all the time is like, you need to be selective. You need to choose the experiences, the projects, the people that you want to be surrounded by. And so I'm going through kind of filtering through those things and learning how everything works day by day. But again, it's so exciting and it's so much fun. And I was talking to a friend recently and he was like, so how do your parents feel about you now? Right? And I think this is so relevant to what we're talking about today. And I said, you know, I thought they would worry a little bit more, but every time I talk to them, I try to give them like a little bit of the small successes that I have. Like, oh, Mom and Dad, this is what I did today. This is who I'm working for. This is the type of shoe that I'm making. And when you boil it all down, I can tell my parents with so much confidence, and anybody, and even to myself nowadays, I'm so happy. I'm so much happier being able to do what I do, control every single aspect, or, you know, if I don't like something, I can change it. I can stop doing it. And that has so much more freedom, and it's made me such a happy person that your parents, the people that care about you the most, they won't have anything to say. They won't have a complaint or a rebuttal for you because all you have to say to them is, I'm living my best life. And that's what they want for you. They don't, you know, at the end of the day, the money, the fame, the success, the title doesn't matter as much as you being happy and healthy. And I think that's a good place for us to be in. And knowing we have our own space, we're eliminating all the obstacles that, whether they were mental or physical, that were stopping us from attaining our goals. You know, it's so good. It's so cool to be able to do what you love every single day.
Right. But not to say, and I will like put it on record, you know, by saying that, like how it started versus how it's going. You know, the reason why, and I can't speak for Vicky, you know, but for me, you know, I think I think I got this from my mom, honestly. Because I grew up like a very spoiled brat, you know. But like at some point, I don't know, like I don't know how and when. I need to really go back and think about like how and when the switch flipped, you know. But the reason why like we're able to have a space where I'm able to pay for half of the rent of our studio and sharing this space with you is because like I started my career working for someone else. I think in total I worked for 4 different brands before I branched out to do my own thing. And so working for somebody else just means, you know, I have a steady income. I have benefits and enables me to save up enough money and even have extra disposable income to like invest. And yes, like I branched out to do my own thing. And again, we talk about this all the time. It's like we don't eat if we don't work. And so so being in the position that we are in, I think like a lot of people are seeing the glamour side of what we do.
Yeah, for sure.
And we have to touch on this like in another episode, you know, things that we do that nobody else knows about. But we have to like actively pursue relentlessly like for work, you know, for clients, for opportunities, because it's not a steady income.
Yeah.
And so I feel very blessed that I've been able to save enough money from my previous jobs working for other people to where it enables me to have a little bit of
a safety net.
Self-exploration.
Yeah.
You know, opportunity. And so so like we didn't just like win the lottery.
Yeah.
Right?
I think a lot of people, especially like you're saying on social media, we put out the best, you know, we put our best foot forward. We put the things that we're most proud of, and people forget almost everything else that we've had to experience. And so, you know, coming from this conversation, it's important to realize that what we were doing before totally led us to what we're doing now. And you can't just want one part of it and ignore everything else, right? You can't just say, I don't want to do the hustle. I don't want to go through making mistakes. I just want to be successful. I want to be where you want to be, and then ignore everything else in your past, right? And I think right now, yes, we're both saying that we're very happy, but this is not the end of, and this is not us saying, oh, look how successful we are, or look how much we've accomplished. We've accomplished a lot, but we're still looking up. We're still wanting to do more and prove ourselves, experience more, learn more. There's just so much more after this. It's just where we are at this point.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. A decade over, for me at least, it's over a decade in the making. I can't wait until we get to another episode where like I really want to talk about how like I walked out of a job one time.
Oh, okay. We need to hear that. That totally needs to be a new episode.
Yeah,
okay.
Because that's really getting down to like, yeah, I effed up. You know, I should not have done that.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, I can't wait to get into that.
Okay. Juicy stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's the end. That's the end of this episode.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channels so that you are always notified when we have a new episode up. And yeah, see you guys next time. Bye.
Have a good one.